progress is extremely slow for me, Tabs. I have to say, extremely slow. Hello and welcome to the virtual towers of Binary Arcadia, where the games go on long into the night. You'll see that Christmas has occurred in the Rich household. I know, Tabs, it's yet to arrive.
There's a Christmas tree in my line of sight, but it is not adorned. So I didn't want to shame myself compared with your spectacular visage in the living room. So, yeah.
And I'd like to say this is all my efforts, but it's mainly the girlfriend's efforts. So there we go. But you're joining us today for a full organic review of Death Stranding. Yes.
The time is nigh. It's been it's been a long time in many ways, Rich, but it's come around almost strangely quick.
It's weird. It's felt like we've played this game for the last 6 months, but you know, we've only really played it for the last month, roughly. No, less than that actually, because we lost a week.
And to our credit, Spawnwave has only just put out his review, I think, hasn't he? Maybe within the week. So for a little small YouTube channel, we're not doing too bad.
Yes, definitely. Especially given the fact we didn't get a pre-release, so this is based on our personal playings of the game after release. So what we're going to touch on. So we're going to talk about things that work well with the game, things that maybe didn't work so well with the game, and a bit of a conclusion on where we think the game stands as an overall piece. And there won't be any spoilers here. We're going to keep spoilers free. We are going to do a full analysis of the story and try and explain some of the things that go on in the story, which is probably going to take quite a bit of time to pull the information together. So you're going to have to wait a little bit longer for that one, but definitely we're going to do a full analysis on the story and try and explain as much as we can on the things that they don't tell you.
And in a Smurf's mouthful, mate, I think we can both say, though, that the reviews are going to be positive, aren't they?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, you're not going to see a Survivor review here of 35. So,
by the way, I love that I just said a Smurf's mouthful and you didn't even bat an eyelid and just cracked on into it. That's amazing.
Well, I just thought, yeah, why not?
Oh, that's madness. Anyway, yeah, it's going to be very glowing. I think we're both very enamoured with the game, and we'll find out to what degrees individually as we push on.
Right, take us away, Tabs. What were your... Okay, let's start with initial impressions. We've already done an initial impression.
Yeah, we'll summarise.
Yes.
So, summary, the first 2 hours and essentially up until 10 hours, I would say. We covered off in the last video, our initial impressions. For me, the first 2 hours were a massive kind of expositional dump in terms of story. For those of us hardcore Death Stranding fans who have watched all of the trailers up to date, it felt like, retreading old ground, so it didn't really add a great deal.
It felt like a recap, didn't it?
Yeah, hugely, and
unfortunately.
And for that reason, combined with the fact that there was little to no gameplay, it was a bit of a struggle, wasn't it? Just to kind of sit through it. It was like a film that you'd already seen.
I would describe it as massively underwhelming, Yeah. Even the gameplay at that point was underwhelming. For the most part.
Well, it is a strange new world, and to the layman Death Stranding fan, well, they need their hand holding a little bit at the start, don't they? They need the world explaining to such a degree to catch them up. So it had its purpose, but to us in our specific frame of reference and experience, it was above and beyond what we needed. It would have been nice if we had had the option to say, do you know Death Stranding? Are you up to date with what it's all about? Okay, we'll skip it,
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I wonder whether the start, literally the very first 2 or 3 hours, whether if we'd not seen a single trailer for Death Stranding and just bought it cold, whether actually there will be so much more interest in what was going on because of the fact we weren't going over old ground for us.
Yeah, if you're one of those BArcadians in the comments in that position, please let us know. We'd love to hear. But, it's hard for us to really put ourselves in that viewpoint because we just weren't. So, Yeah, that's our individual point of view. And then the next, Rich, what would you say? 8 hours. Mostly, I would say, well, we compared it to the Great Plateau in Zelda Breath of the Wild, didn't we? The tutorial section almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's quite slow paced. There's not a great deal going on. You don't really meet too much of the story. Doesn't really move on in that first like 10 hours. After the first couple of hours, the story doesn't really. It's sort of almost like Tab says, introducing the mechanics, how it works, what you'll be doing moving forwards, and it's all right. It's a little bit, and I hate to say it, but it's a little bit boring.
And I would say, to get a bit more critical, that the next 8 hours after the first 2 hours, where, as Rich says, it's more about introducing you to the gameplay mechanics, I would say it's overly drawn out, it felt for me, and also overly punitive. It didn't need to be perhaps quite as challenging. Well, I say that, for me, I felt like it was more of a slog than it needed to be, if you want, in a nutshell.
So I feel like the first 10 hours is like a really tough uphill struggle. You're really struggling to keep balance. Cargo at this point feels really heavy because you don't have any of the cool things that come later that help, like quality of life things that start coming through, like some of the pieces of kit that you can chirally create or chirally print, or I just feel like until you get to that point, it's a real uphill struggle, and that really weighs down on you to the point where you feel a bit like, oh, I've got to go to there now. Yeah,
you're hitting walls. The world feels really hostile. You've got mules, you've got BTs, you've got just, because Sam is so underpowered at this point, just walking requires a lot from you. And I won't say it's unnecessary necessarily. That sounds funny. But I would say it serves a purpose in providing contrast to what comes next. And I suppose because of how difficult and challenging it is and burdensome, it really does, underline the feeling in the next part of the game even more so. But at the same time, you can't help but think, from at least comparing it to conventional video games, that the pacing, that learning curve just hikes up almost exponentially, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think this is the thing. So we compare it to the Great Plateau in Zelda. Now, that's like a couple of hours worth of literally teaching you all you need to know. The glider, all the mechanics, cooking, all of that. You sort of know what you're doing on the Great Plateau, but it's a couple of hours. The thing that sort of is the mismatch and makes it feel so much of an uphill struggle is the fact it goes on for so long. And the only time you start to see how the game's going to start to change and move forward and become is that first moment that they say, if you go to the bike, you can use this bike. There's a bike basically beside Bridges' facility, and I don't think that's a spoiler by saying that. And
it's not the major one. We're going to go easy on spoilers in this review, but carry on, Rich.
And basically they say its battery's dead, you can't use it, but at a point it says, now you can chirally print things, you can use the bike basically, you can charge it up, and I think from that point on the game really starts to hit its stride, I think, but it takes such a long time to get to that point.
I don't know. I would say it's slightly an anticlimax on the bike, because you suddenly feel like, okay, I've been given the keys to the kingdom here and I can just go nuts. Again, to make a comparison, it's not like the Breath of the Wild bike, is it, where you can suddenly just thrash across half the map. You've still got a lot of difficulty involved. The map is so intricately obstacled, if that's a word, that the bike itself still struggles to kind of conquer that and get through it. So it doesn't, you don't go zero to hero, but certainly it feels like there's a bit more freedom granted. And then the next section, the next area, because you would say, Rich, wouldn't you, it's not actually a traditional open world like Breath of the Wild where it's one big...
No.
It's actually split into areas, isn't it?
Yeah, so... And then it's a really interesting comparison between our two playthroughs. So what happened was, you get this bike and you continue to do deliveries, and then eventually you get to a point where you have to do this very long trek, and it goes through a massive BT area. And the bike is obviously given to you to try and make this trek a little bit easier because of the distance that you have to travel. Now, Tabs had the bike, and although he hit a lot of BTs on the way, his journey was, I wouldn't say easy, but it was less difficult. Now, unfortunately, I managed to lose the bike down the river, stupidly. And I think that maybe tells you more about how good me and Tabs are at games compared to each other than you need to know. But anyway, I digress. And that meant that trek for me was like a slog, to the point where I'm like, I just can't do this. I just need to turn this off and come back to it, because I felt that weighed down by that massive journey I had to now do on foot, that I was just like, oh, I just can't do it. There's BTs everywhere. It's such an overawed, you know.
And that's actually a really good point, Rich, because it helps give us reference on, the pacing again of the game, because a pro of it is, well, it shows you how dynamic the game is, that it can be very different from one player to the next, because it allows those moving parts to move in such a way. But at the same time, you could also say it's a con, because, well, the pacing of the game at that early stage, you'd hope it would be a little bit more forgiving to players. So, for example, that bike would have appeared in a private room or back at a hub somewhere for you to then just pick up, and seemingly it didn't. So you could almost say, well, was that kind of almost bug tested enough? You could almost say it was a bit like a bug. You'd lost your bike and suddenly your experience was just reset to ground zero, and almost unfairly so, because I know from being in that room with you at that time, you'd lost the will. You'd absolutely lost the will to play. You were ready to just give up. And I think that would have really punctuated a kind of a troubling period of the game. So I'm glad we got you back on the horse.
On the flip side of that, Tab said, come on, mate, we'll get on there and do it. I'll help you if you want. Let's just press on through it. And I was I'm really not up for that, because I was just so like distraught at the fact, because basically I'd tried to get through a different route that didn't have the BTs, because at this point the BTs are like your worst possible nightmare. You have no way of dealing with them at all, other than trying to sneak past them. And if you can't get past them, you're just into a fight and you've no way of dealing with them. But Tabs pressed on, said, yeah, let's do it. And the feeling of accomplishment when we got to where we needed to get to, which I think was Port Knot City, was just amazing. It was an incredible feeling. So it's really weird, like that felt like a real struggle for me to get there compared to Tabs, but the achievement of getting there was maybe heightened because of the struggle in getting there.
Which is what you could say the game masters that to and fro, if you like, throughout. Some of the most satisfying parts of the game are because of that relationship between struggle and accomplishment, which and I think we'll come back to.
And I think that opening 10 hours of the game, you really feel like you've got mixed feelings at this point. Like you're not sure. For me, at that point, it's teetering. Is it going to be a good game? Is it going to be a game I'm not so much of a fan of? You sort of...
Oh, it's a roller coaster. I mean, we've not mentioned it thus far, but a big wall for me was the menus at that point. They really started to kick in about how cumbersome they are and how overly convoluted. And they'd started to grind on me to the point where just the menus alone were kind of making me hit a wall where I was just thinking, I need a break from this. And they're, unfortunately, and ever present throughout the game. They don't get any easier, do they, Rich?
No, and you, to the point where, and I think I've seen it on a few people that have said that reviewed the game, just to complete a mission is like 30 presses of the X button.
Yeah,
it's just
shout
insane.
out to Girlfriend Review, was it, Rich? Where she really described it in a fantastic breakdown of.
Yeah, and actually it's really, really funny the way that they've done that in that video. But yeah, it's just, I feel like it's unnecessarily convoluted. Like, why does it need to be as complex as that? It doesn't need to be. And there is an auto skip feature, but it doesn't really move it along any faster. you still have to be there banging the X to try and get through it. And it gets to the point where you're almost like, I can't be bothered with reading this information.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to that. That's the theme of the game for me. You know, that overly engineered, overly contrived, to the point where it actually takes away from the game at times. But should we talk about the next area, Rich, after the initial impressions?
So as Tabs has said, this is not really a traditional open world game. So there's like an opening area which you can travel to and from eventually. Once you basically open up the fast travel feature, and then you get into another area which is probably the main area of the game, I would say. That's like the main open world, I would say. Which and it's at this point when you've sort of, and there is a cutscene, but you travel to this new part of the world over, I think it's like a tar ocean, I think, and you get to this new area, and I don't know, it's like the game suddenly starts to blossom in this area.
Oh, massively! It's you're starting at this point to really unlock some tools in the game, which just make the traversal aspect way more dynamic. And way more in your control is the most part. It's empowerment, essentially. So again, it's like the Grand Plateau. You've got your glider. It's almost that sense, but replace the glider with what, Rich? An exoskeleton, essentially.
Yeah, or a vehicle. Eventually.
And I have to say, this by far and away, I would say this is the middle portion of the game, as Rich says, after 10 hours. By far and away was the most satisfying period of the game for me.
Yeah.
I ended up getting absolutely engrossed, blissfully lost in the addictive gameplay loop of making deliveries. And it's kind of ironic because in the game's lore, mules are these people that actually get obsessed with making deliveries to the point where they kind of develop a disorder. And I almost became that myself. I was like a mule. I was just I think, in fact, Rich, I clocked a few more hours in the end on you because I think I literally just got caught up in making deliveries.
I'm pretty certain what happens is you unlock basically a vehicle that can carry a colossal amount of cargo, and that means you can go, oh right, okay, well I'll just take on these 10 missions and I'll literally just go to all of the different way stations on the way.
Yeah, it becomes like a logistical management game, at that point.
Exactly, yeah. But with a real fun element. I think it's just really good fun, and
it's chucking varied mission types at you, isn't it, all the time?
Yeah.
You've got a series of preppers essentially who you're looking to, to make good with, to build your reputation with, and you do get some samey missions within that. But, sprinkled over the top of it are some really kind of diverse, original missions, which just keep you second guessing, they keep you on the back foot, keep you surprised. And then obviously, as you strengthen your relationships with each of these preppers, you're unlocking new toys all of the time, which just bear into your next run, your next mission. And one of the big things, Rich, which I'll let you talk about a bit more, is the roads. I mean, how that's a massive thing, isn't it?
So in this new area, there's these things that they're called auto pavers, and basically, if you supply them with materials, they rebuild these roads. And as soon as you get to the point where you're supplying material to these auto pavers and the roads are built, you can move rapidly across the terrain because
they're like highways, aren't they?
Basically, in essence. Because the thing is, although the vehicles are really good, the land is so obstacle filled, as we've already mentioned, that you still struggle to move across at any speed. It's easier, but it's still not fast. But once the roads are in, it's like Speedy Gonzales.
And there's like a rock, paper, scissors, isn't there, to missions? Like the bike will be good for some, the truck will be good for others, on foot for certain ones. And you have to kind of measure that out. But when the roads come into play, they just literally cut through the landscape in such a way that it just almost removes all obstacles to a degree anyway. And I think that kind of leads us into, Rich, the other part of the game. We've talked about this individual sense of empowerment, but the collaborative aspect comes into play then, doesn't it? The asynchronous element blossoms, hugely.
Massively.
And what were your feelings on that, my friend?
Well, that's where I mean, at this point, you are starting to use people's ladders, people's ropes and stuff. But at this point, people are help you build your roads, so they're also supplying. And the feeling of like, I don't know what it is. It's like almost like a joyous feeling when it goes this, come up on screen. This person's added some materials to your road, or this person's finished the road for you, or this person's used the road. It just feels like you're playing in this like blossoming community of people that are all like-minded, all trying to play the game together.
And you're finding a generator just when you need to recharge your car or your exoskeleton. A timefall shelter just when you think, oh, I'm really, my cargo's really starting to degrade here. It's touch and go. And there's just all these kind of little ropes that are just extended out to you, which just really add another element to the game, which is hard to kind of describe, but it's certainly makes it a very original, very remarkable experience in that respect.
Absolutely. Probably one of the best done things of the game, I think. The way that they've incorporated that asynchronous gameplay is fantastic. I really do think it's fantastic.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the only thing that, again, let it down, or the main thing that let it down at this point, again, was the menus. I still found that would become very fatiguing. It's almost like listening to a pair of bad speakers for a lengthy period of time, to the point where, you get that sense of fatigue of, oh, I've got to turn this off for a bit. And the menu system, because of how many deliveries you're doing at this point, they're almost like missions within themselves, like 10 minutes of menu skipping, loading up your cargo again, deciding what you need to buy, fabricate, keep in your private locker. It's quite laborious, and again, for me, somewhat lessened the joy, the addiction of the experience. Just to throw a bit of a con in there, Rich. But should we move on to the next part in the mountains?
Well, I think at this point, you're starting to meet BTs much more regularly at this point. They're sort of dotted. Almost every mission you're doing at this point, you're meeting some BTs at the time. But you are starting to get basically more and more equipment that can deal with the BTs, that make them much less overbearing, which is obviously a really good thing. And I would just like to touch on one of my favourite missions of this game. You're given a package in the game in a very odd way. It's unusual. You're not giving a package in the way that you're given a package normally. And you have to go and deliver this package. But it turns out that the package you've been given is not all it is cracked up to be. Basically, it's not as it seems.
Oh yeah.
And you have to do some story beats to work out what you can do with this package. And I thought that mission particularly was one of my favourite of the entire game. It flips it on its head a little bit, and you really have to actually think about, you're not just a delivery guy. You need to actually go, well, actually, how can I solve this particular problem? Which is, once you know what you need to do, it's relatively easy to solve. But I just really liked that particular mission.
And that's a really good point, actually. Something I've not necessarily thought through, but the story does well at throwing spanners in the works, essentially, to break you from that, loop of of satisfaction, and actually get you to move the story on a bit and focus on the main line of the game. So yeah, it does a really good job of that. But yeah, as you say, it tests you, doesn't it? At times, you kind of you suddenly put into this reactionary state of mind where you've got to just work with what you have, and that's nice. It's a change of pace.
Definitely. And as you sort of work up into the mountains, as Tabs has mentioned, the story really starts to motor now. You're seeing cutscenes all the time. Almost, you get to a point where most missions are moving the story forwards, and it really starts to find a pace, I think.
I mean, we should probably branch off here, though, because I think we had slightly different experiences in the mountains. I think you found it slightly more frustrating, maybe, and I actually just enjoyed them for being different.
See, I found the mountains as big a slog as the start of the game. And I don't know whether maybe I didn't play them well enough.
No, I don't know, mate. I don't think you're
that.
on your own on that. I think a lot of people, from some of the thoughts and opinions I've seen, are similar, that they hated the mountains, or it really felt like a complete U-turn in terms of the gameplay experience up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the change of pace. It's much more difficult terrain to move across. But I just feel like the terrain was difficult enough as it was. Like, its stamina depleted you. You got cold, so that meant your stamina depleted really quickly. And there's BTs everywhere, and that becomes a real nuisance because you're struggling against the terrain. You're slipping down it. Your stamina's disappearing, but the BTs just add that element that you just can't do anything about. You might slide down into a BT, but towards the end of this portion, you do start to receive some equipment that really helps you to challenge that part. But yeah, I just found it a real struggle, and I started to really motor on the game and feel like I was really breaking the game down. And then I felt like I just hit a brick wall there. But it sounds like you took much more fun from that.
There was a period of adjustment because, like you say, you turn from this, you feel like basically a lorry driver hauling, monster hauls around and just totally laying waste to the world. And then you hit these mountains and suddenly you're thrust back into this ultra hostile environment where, even single missions become a real test again. So there's no longer this sense of taking on multiple missions, at least easily, and shifting them around, in the click of fingers. You've really, I will say I probably focus much more on the story in the mountains, less, trying to work up those prepper relationships because it was so difficult. But I think once you get into the flow of it, and if you like your hiking, well, it's basically a really good hiking simulator. All these conditions, blizzards, storms in the mountains.
Well, the other thing is, if you've got plenty of chiral printers, there's some things you can. There's some things you can build that make it so much better, but they can't take away from the initial movement through the terrain.
It's a shock to the system, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll just touch on something here, and I think it happens just before the first time it happens, just before you go head up into the mountains, but it also happens again in the mountains. Is you meet Cliff, the one of the main antagonists in the game, as we've established in some of the analysis we've done. But that again, it turns the game on its head, and then actually it was such an adjustment for me. I really struggled with that. It turns the game into a different game, and it wasn't what I was expecting, and it's not a type of game that I particularly excel in, I would say.
Yeah,
so I really struggled with that.
I don't think it's a spoiler, Rich, to say that those sections are more combat oriented, is it? I think we've seen that from trailers, so I think we can say as much as that. And for that reason, it asks of you a much different style of gameplay. And to be fair, mate, I would even say I struggled with some of those areas, not necessarily for the same reason as you did, but it doesn't necessarily hold your hand again. It will let you, it wills you to find out what you need to do to get past those sections.
Yeah.
But, there's an element of frustration I found, at least in a couple of those.
The one thing I'll say is, it's like the rest of the game. It sort of tells you what you need to do, but it doesn't signpost it. So it's very easy to go off in the wrong direction, or just think, oh, okay, I just need to, do this, and that's completely not what you need to do. It doesn't expressly say,
or in this case,
this is what you need to do.
This, do it again, and do it again. And if you played the game, you know what that means. But there was certainly a period where I was literally running around that area of the game, just literally bashing my head against a brick wall, thinking, how do I get out of this? I don't understand what I need to do. And that was a shame, because those moments actually kind of take you out of the experience a little bit, because you feel like you've broken out of the confines of the video game. It's a strange feeling. It was for me anyway.
So this happens a few times in the game. You're sort of taken away to a different place. And And the first time that happens, I really, really struggled with that. I couldn't get my head around the combat aspect of it. I don't know whether I didn't have my head in the right space. I don't know. I'd not played that type of game for a while. But actually, from the second time it happens and the third, I really enjoyed those sections. I thought they were really well done, especially the second one. I thought the second one was amazing. So yeah, I mean, again, just an interesting way of mixing up the dynamic but moving the story forward.
And at this point, you know, I mean, a word on the story, I would say up to where we're talking about, say the mountains, and even a bit beyond, you know, it's okay. As Rich says, it starts to speed up those beats. You start to feel more of a pace to events. The only thing, a criticism from me is even some of the delivery at this point, and we'll come back to this, is a little bit strange at times. I feel like Kojima can throw up so many things in the air at one time that the more meaningful parts of the story kind of get lost in the noise. And for that, it just undercuts some of the, the drama, if you like, of some of the key moments that, if they were punctuated a little bit better, and it's a hard balance to take, because in this game, a lot of the kind of background story, a lot of flesh on the bone, Rich, is actually, it's included in like data logs, isn't it, that you can dig into?
Yeah, so like it will say this has happened, but it might not say specifically why this has happened and what's led to, and then you'll have to read some of the data bits in it or emails and stuff to work out what has actually happened. So, and I sort of get why they did that. I mean, I have to say, and let's just talk about the story. For me, the story is fantastic. I think it's one of the best stories of this generation. Now, I'm not saying that it's the greatest delivered story of this generation, because I don't think it necessarily is, but certainly as a rounded story, if it was a film, although you wouldn't go and see it if it was a film, because the cutscenes total over 9 hours in this game. But I just loved the story of this game.
Oh, certainly. I think the actual bones of it are fantastic, and I think if you'd had some kind of Hollywood editor come in and lend Kojima a hand, it really, you could snip a really good film out of it. I've no doubt on that, because some of the plot twists, some of the plot beats, they're fantastic and fantastical. You've got to suspend belief at numerous points in this game. It is high concept stuff and bonkers at times. But, ultimately, if you lay it out on a piece of paper, it's a very interesting story. I just feel that Kojima, there was some shots fired in reviews about him perhaps getting a bit self-indulgent, a bit lost up his own bum at times. And I think it's hard, isn't it? Because we talked about how much we love Kojima and his idiosyncrasies and his foibles as a game developer. And in many ways, I wouldn't have it any other way, because it makes it so much more of a unique experience because of those. But I couldn't help but feel, if things had been done differently at times during the delivery of the story, things might just have landed a little bit better, for me personally, at least.
That's where it boils down. There are a few elements, and it's really, the story sort of like ticks along until the end, where it starts to sledgehammer, and it's literally like boom, boom, boom. There's story beats plenty, and every time there's one, you're left a bit like, jaw on the floor moments, but they come thick and fast towards the end, and then you get to this point where the story is starting to unravel, and then it chooses this strange,
the weirdest narrative device
delivering.
We don't want to spoil it, do we, Rich? But
no,
the gist of it is it's a very laboured narrative device. I can't even see the point of it, Rich, when I try and think about it. What does it actually achieve?
Like, you look at it and it's Kojima and you're thinking this must be a metaphor for something, but it seems like it's, I cannot work out what it's for, why he decided to do that at this point. It's so disjointed for like half an hour.
It feels like why. Maybe he just got kind of obsessed with this idea, which sounded cool and different, because it certainly is, But, you know, it's like when they actually, you know, put it into practice and somebody play tested it, either he vetoed it and said, no, we're keeping it in, you know, or I just don't really see what it does apart from protract the experience and the delivery of the narrative to a point where, you know, at times I was a bit frustrated, I was a bit confused, I was a bit like, again, getting pulled out of it and probably missing parts of the, you know, the intricacies of the story being unveiled to me because of that fact. And that's, again, where I would say it doesn't stick the landing at times. I certainly had to go and look at articles after the game to kind of comb over some of those, you know, more intricate details to piece it together in a much more coherent manner.
I have to say, I thought that whole thing was odd but I didn't disconnect from it. I stayed in the moment. I feel like maybe you disconnected from it a little bit. You were so frustrated by the oddness of it.
Well, I have to say, I mean, you played the game probably at a better pace than me generally. I think I'd set it up in a way when I completed it. I'd basically finished, I think, the last at least 3 chapters in one go. And at that point, I was reaching the end of my tether. It was late into the evening, I think. And that didn't help because you don't know it's coming necessarily, do you? No, and when you're in that position, you feel like you have to stick it almost, don't you? It's not like something you feel like, okay, well, I'll just save here and come off. So, and again, that you could say that's a criticism of it. It doesn't, you don't know it's coming, and as Rich puts it, this big sledgehammer of storytelling, and you don't know how long it's going to last. And therefore it's like, you know, you almost need the game to say, oh, okay, by the way, in the next 5 hours, you're going to need to,
You'll be 3 button presses.
Yeah, earmark the next 3 or 4 hours out your life to sit still and tune in. So,
and I know the sort of final mission of the story of the game, I felt fine about it, but I know you had a tough time with it. It sort of, again, it doesn't really signpost what needs to happen or where what you're doing needs to take place. And because of that, it's possible, as Tabs found out, to just end up nowhere near where you need to go. And you can't use the map and stuff that you would use normally. Now, I just could remember what needed to happen, basically. Tabs, you were in the dark a bit and ended up like nowhere near where you needed to be.
Well, I think a blessing and a curse for me at the start of the game. I was able to share it with some friends, so we took it in turns on missions, and I think that bit me at that point, because one of the missions that you would have had the knowledge from to help you at that point in the game, I did not have. And like you say, that the game was not forceful enough in how it shepherded me to where I needed to go. So it became hugely frustrating, I have to say. And again, another moment of just ripping me out of the experience. But, you know, ultimately, I love the story.
I do get why I sort of do get why he did that, because it basically takes the story, or it takes the game, and it basically puts you back where you started when the game was really difficult and it challenged you, and it basically strips you of all those tools that made the game feel a little bit more fun to play, and it puts you back in that original scenario where it's, you know, challenging the environment. And I sort of liked that aspect of it, as almost like it full circled not only the gameplay elements, but the sort of bookended the story as well. And I did really like that idea.
Yeah, nothing against it. I think it's just because I fell out, you know, of the kind of the tunnel that you were supposed to go down, and suddenly I was just, it lost all of its kind of atmosphere for me, and I was literally at this point where I was like, okay, what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? And but that's my own experience, and I'm sure, you know, 95% of the people who play this game won't fall into that category, so really it's an anomaly. But, you know, I mean, we're going to save a lot of this the story discussion for like a sort of a spoiler cast video we're going to do, where we're going to try and knit everything together, fill out some of the, you know, the question marks over different parts of the game and the plot in a separate video for you guys. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, what do we think of the story, Rich? What would you
I guess that's it. We just need to conclude what's our overall feeling of the game. And I think it feels like a game of multiple halves or quarters or thirds, whatever you want to say, because the story is outstanding for me. I absolutely loved it. I like the sci-fi aspect of it. I feel like it would make an incredible film if it was shortened from 9 hours. And I feel like almost to the point where the gameplay almost is like, it's like, I almost come to the point where I feel like it's a film that's got gameplay with it, not a game that's got a story aspect to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, parts of what I didn't like about the story at times was how abstracted it can feel and how incoherent. You have characters dotting in and out, almost vanishing in and out of the story. And there's not a lot of a sense of coherency in place at times. But then I got my head around that because I think that's to do with what the game is actually, is just a metaphor. For me, it is just one big metaphor of what it is to suffer great trauma, what coming to terms with the struggle of life, and how you overcome that, and the power of hope and the power of love. And I really do appreciate now, all the characters in it, I feel they're almost allegories of different parts of our psyches. The Death Stranding itself is almost an allegory of internal mental conflict. And I think that's what Kojima has tried to achieve. He wants us to go through that journey, all these, gamers in the world, all people who suffer, we all suffer mental illness at times in our life. And he's trying to give us, he's trying to embolden hope in all of us, to self-actualize that in reality in our own lives. And all the different characters in it, they kind of stand for different things, and we'll come on to this again in the spoiler cast video. But as far as what it means, what the message is, I think it's really successful in that. And I've certainly come away from it feeling affected by the game, feeling that it lingers with you, that it has, it has meaning and it has importance in that. Where it doesn't work for me is, not consistently sticking the landing and having pacing issues, but, considered as a whole, on balance, the game is a real success for me. One of the most addictive gameplay experiences I've played this year and for a long time. Combined with the fact, as you say, Rich, an outstanding and remarkable and interesting story.
And I would throw out there amazing voice acting from everybody in the game. I really thought it was fantastic. The motion capture and the physics of the people and the motion capture is amazing. And that's something
technologically
else
you can't really fault it, can you? It is the best we've seen in terms of graphics, motion capture, animation, performance. It's astonishing, really.
The world is absolutely stunning. You can come across some incredible vistas, and you really get that sense of, I've achieved, I've got to this place and I've seen this vista, this amazing waterfall, or this amazing valley that you've managed to crest, and you see the path ahead of you. And there are some amazing areas in this game. There really are some outstanding areas.
Yeah, no joke. I mean, it is just a simulator in a lot of respects, and that's one of them. It literally, for those that don't hike or that don't have the opportunity to hike, well, it's not a bad substitute for that, is it, Rich?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
You really get that feeling of, nature being a theme, getting back in touch with nature. Definitely. And just appreciating things for what they are,
And I suppose I was really worried about this game when I first started to play this game, and I'd hyped this game maybe too much for myself. Maybe that was through the work we did on the channel and the videos we made. And after we'd played it for the first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, I was worried. I was thinking I wanted this to be like a proper experience that I would never forget, and I was really worried that I wasn't going to get that experience from it. But actually, the game came through for me. I think it was something I won't ever forget playing, and it's an outstanding game. I really think it is.
Yeah, I'm so glad it was released, and I'm so glad, you know, it's been, at least from what we can tell, successful. I really hope that Kojima gets another throw at the dice. I think there's so much more he could do with it. And I think this was a period of adjustment and a learning curve for him as an independent developer that, you know, factors into the game and perhaps some of the pacing issues we've seen.
I would like to say, given how good this is, and I'm not saying this is the greatest game I've ever played, it's not Breath of the Wild, and it does have its faults, and that's why it doesn't score a perfect mark. But to achieve what he has achieved in the time span he has achieved it in is miraculous.
3 years essentially, wasn't it? And that includes setting up an independent operation, which must have felt completely alien to him because, you know, he was a part of Konami for so long. You know, in terms of the actual endeavour that's gone into this game, the thought, the meaning, you know, it's just a miraculous achievement in and of itself. I mean, of course, we're reviewing a video game at the end of the day, and a huge percentage of the gaming population are not going to give, you know, two shits about the context of the game and how it's created.
Absolutely.
But, you know, I think that's definitely worth a mention.
Yeah, I don't think how long it took to make and the achievement that Kojima has made in the game should have any sort of relevance on what score it should get as a game, because that doesn't matter. If we're scoring games, they're just on how good they are, you know, not whether it took 5 minutes to make or whether it took 10 years to make, or whether it cost 100 million to make or whether it cost $1 million to make.
Yeah, it's not fair to project the need onto gamers to have, you know, an encyclopedic knowledge of the gaming industry in Kojima Productions.
Exactly. But I think it's more of a commentary on what he's managed to achieve rather than that's what we're going to base our score on.
Certainly, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, on balance, if you have the time and the patience to give to Death Stranding, and you're at least, you know, interested and intrigued by what you've seen in videos, I'd implore you to give it a go and, you know, just give it some slack, because after that 10 hours, you will, you know, if you're anything like me, you know, you'll really dig into a rich and rewarding gameplay experience. And that will be ultimately rewarded and incentivized by a remarkable story. It has its problems, as we've said. Menu systems can be fatiguing. The delivery of the story is idiosyncratic, should we put it. But on balance, you know, it's a fantastic game. I've said to Rich, I have to score this one a bit of a Schrodinger's cat score. And for anybody who doesn't understand that reference, it's basically like a quantum theory that if you look in a box, sometimes there's a cat, sometimes there's not. I think that's the gist of it anyway. Because of, you know, quantum understanding. And essentially I'm going to give it an 8/9 out of 10 because at some points it is just amazing, and at other points it just didn't quite stick the landing for me. But on balance, you know, it's still fantastic. So I'm going to give it an 8/9 out of 10 for me.
So I wasn't so bogged down in the menus for starters, and I don't know, I think maybe I paced the end of the game differently to Tabs. So I didn't feel as frustrated with the ending. And I think because of that, I'm going to score this a 9. But I'm going to say something maybe controversial, but I don't think they should make another Death Stranding. Because I think as a standalone piece, I just like it for what it is. Like the characters, I like the story as it is. I don't want there to be a continuation.
I'd agree. It's almost like it would be nice if you saw some sort of graphic novel, maybe somewhat of a prologue of what happens to the characters after it. But to make a game out of that, you know, I'm not sure it needs it, does it?
I'm not saying he shouldn't make another Death Stranding story
in the universe,
but I just don't. I think the story is so wholesome and well-rounded for me. I don't want to see what happened next. It's the conclusion at the ending is perfect.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
It sits so well for me, and I just feel like it was so nicely done at the end that it just makes you feel like you don't want to see what happened next. You want to just remember it as that and just think of it as a niceness-ish.
Yeah, it gives it a preciousness, doesn't it? Because it's finite, and because you don't want it to become, anything more than what it is. It was just a nice package. For instance, Red Dead Redemption 2. So Red Dead Redemption 2 is a story of itself, but actually it leads into Red Dead Redemption 1. So the story of Red Dead Redemption 2, I don't want to see those characters necessarily again, if that makes sense. And it's a prequel to Red Dead Redemption 1. And I just think that's another game where you don't need to see it. I'd love to see something else in the Death Stranding universe, but something different, not involving these characters, different part of the world. Yeah, a new story, exactly. Different cast in a different part of the world, and maybe a slightly different perspective on the message, the underlying metaphors and meaning that Kojima was going for. So yeah, certainly.
So there we have it. The channel is an 8/9 out of 10.
If you pushed me gun to head, I think I'd have to give it a 9 out of 10. But I need to I feel like I need to make people aware of parts of the game that are
that's
specifically challenging.
Yeah, but people experience and we've seen that this game is incredibly divisive. Some people love it, some people hate it. So the fact that you didn't love it as much as I love it necessarily, that's fine.
No, definitely. And I think, Rich, I've been slurping too much Monster during this video because I'm desperate for a piss. So do you want to wrap this one up for us, my friend?
Yeah. So guys, that's our Death Stranding review, organic. So we've not scripted any of this. Hopefully you can let us know what you think about Death Stranding. What were your experiences of it? And definitely look out in the coming weeks for our analysis of the story in its entirety. And if you did like the video, give us a like. And if you did like what you saw, then you can always subscribe to the channel and click that bell so you can get notifications of all our new content. And I think that's about it. Another one for the archive.
Stamped and completed.
How are you thinking the barcade's looking from the few little tidbits I've showed you?
Yeah, mate, really nice. Looks like a fucking Knight Rider's car or something, doesn't it? So,
yeah.